Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 greatest Chicago Bears players of all time. This was another hard list like the Pittsburgh Steelers list that we put out yesterday. At the end of the day, a couple tough cuts were made. Mike Ditka, in my opinion, one of the more overrated all-time greats at the tight end position compared to some of these Bears legends. Um, just doesn't have nearly as much as far as his playing days to really warrant being higher on this list. Um, some of these guys are the greatest players at their position, and some of these guys have been at the greatest player at their position during their era for a much larger time than Ditka was. Not to mention they've won several more championships and contributed more to the Bears' franchise success. The other one would be Bronco Nagurski. He was probably the toughest cut I made, being that he did play during a time that the NFL was still a developing sport and doesn't necessarily have, mind blowing stats for his time, um, being that he only had four first team All Pro selections. Comparing him to players who played at, you know, when the game was more developed. It's hard for me to put him a little higher than some of these guys. But at number 10, we're going to start off with a bang. One of my favorite players, Doug Atkins, one of the best when it came to just putting an arm through his defender and just running him back. Um, Only a one time first team All Pro selection, but several times he was a second team All Pro selection. One of the best players at the defensive end position, really revolutionized and modernized the whole idea of an interior D lineman who can play edge rusher, finish his career with 94 sacks. At number 9, we're going to go with middle linebacker Bill George. Bill George played several positions for the Bears in the 50s and the early 60s. But namely, he played middle linebacker and defensive tackle. And he could play well on both positions. He had 11 and a half sacks one year as a middle linebacker, which is pretty impressive even in this day and age. 8-time first team All Pro selection and the anchor to the Bears defense in the 1950s. At number 8, this is supposed to be uh, number 8. This is going to be Gale Sayers, one of the most revolutionary players in the history of the NFL. Gale Sayers modernized the whole idea of a running back who can be an all-purpose player, specifically in the passing game. But he could do more than that. He could return touchdowns and do so much more. He was a 5-time first-team All-Pro selection in 6 seasons. Had he not gotten hurt, he would have been a monster throughout his entire career. As a rookie, took the league by storm. And even though he never won a ring, certainly is one of the most impactful players to ever lace up a Bears uniform. At number 7, we're going to go with 7-time first team All Pro selection guard, the late 1930s and the early 1940s. A little bit more dominant, and 4-time NFL champion for the Bears. That would be Danny Fortman. Fortman was one of the few first players who was great at pass protection in the NFL when, the forward pass started becoming a big thing. He was especially crucial for George Halas and Jimmy Konzelman when they ended up blowing out the Washington, at the time, Redskins in the 1940 NFL championship game. And he was essentially one of the big parts of that offensive line, but not the best player on that offensive line. That would be center Bulldog Turner, if I'm not mistaken, an 8-time first team All Pro selection in his own right, several times winning a championship. Bulldog Turner was the first great center of a great dynasty in the NFL. Talking about centers who can call out their own play. He didn't do that, but he was one of the most unblock or unstoppable players when it came to getting past him. It was very difficult. He was just a mauler in the run game. Once he got his hands on you, there was no stopping. Bulldog Turner comes in at number 6. Two players on the offensive line who were especially crucial to the Bears winning ways in the 1940s. And number 5, we're going to go with a modern day Bears player. Yeah, I know a lot of these players are from the older time periods because the Bears have just not been relevant in modern days. We'll see if Ben Johnson can change that. But yeah, I mean, majority of that dominant time period for the Bears was pre-Super Bowl era. One of the first players who's not in this, who his whole career was played in the Super Bowl era. That would be Brian Urlacher, who helped the Bears make the Super Bowl in 2006 when he won Defensive Player of the Year, four-time first-team All-Pro selection, one of the best linebackers in the NFL history when it comes to coverage. Superb tackler. Does he get a little lower on this list just because he couldn't tackle the world's fastest man in Tom Brady? No, not at all. But Brian Urlacher certainly deserves his place on the list. He was the best player for the Bears defense in the 2000s, helped rejuvenate that legacy um, and add on to the rich history of Chicago linebackers. He comes in at number 5. At number 4, another old timey player that would be none other than quarterback Sid Luckman. Believe it or not, I mean, this man is still the greatest quarterback in the history of the Chicago Bears, and it has been about 80 years since he last played. Um, yeah, we're talking about the guy who still in this day and age has the modern record for the most yards per attempt in NFL history for a career that would be 9.2 yards per attempt. Um, he was the uh, he was the commander in chief of an offense that dominated in the 1940s and revolutionized and really started the whole forward pass. And that all started with that 1940 NFL championship win against Washington, where they won 73 to nothing. Sid Luckman is easily one of the greatest players in Chicago Bears history, and certainly helped them win a lot of championships at that time period. Number 3 is going to be a player from that dominant 1985 Bears team, Mike Singletary. If I'm not mistaken, a 7-time first team All Pro selection. Um, one of the smartest players in NFL history when it came to reading quarterbacks. I think the fact that his eyes just seemed to bulge out of his face as much as they did, it kind of speaks to just how focused he was, but definitely probably helped him read the field better. Um, but Mike Singletary was hard hitting, intimidating, had great side to side range, and is definitely worth top 3 spot as far as greatest linebackers of all time, top 3 greatest players in Chicago Bears history, the best player on that Bears defense that was so vaunted in 1985. Number 2, Dick Butkus, probably the only modern NFL, probably the only modern Bear to not have a Super Bowl ring other than Brian Urlacher. He never made the playoffs in his career, but is an 8-time first team All Pro selection, easily the best linebacker of the late 60s and the 1970s. George Halas and the Bears had a really good draft record from 1930, like 1 all the way to 1960. Dick Butkus just added on to that 8 years, but easily one of the best linebackers in the league during that time period. Um, and Butkus definitely is a Chicago legend, revered. I don't think I know a single person who's not a Bears fan who treats him like God, and rightfully so. I mean, he is one of the most lovable and most iconic Bear players of all time, in spite of the fact that they never made the playoffs or won anything of note without him or with him. But at number 1, it has to be the greatest linebacker of all time, or excuse me, running back of all time, and that would be none other than Walter Payton. Um, you can make an argument for Jim Brown, you can make an argument for Barry Sanders. In my opinion, true running back Walter Payton is the greatest of all time at that position. Sweetness finished his career with 16,000 rushing yards. Um, helped them win a championship, won an MVP, and was easily one of the greatest when it came to breaking tackles. Was as good as far as in the receiving game, and was great at both juking out players and just running through players itself. He was the main focal point of the Bears offense that won the Super Bowl in 1985. And he, in my opinion, is the greatest Chicago Bear player of all time. I know there are going to be a little few controversial picks on this. This is personally my list. Um, Chicago Bears fans, everyone else, let me know what you guys think in the comments section. But yeah, this is my top 10 list as far as the greatest Bears of all time.